everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is James O'Connor. James, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for joining us. It was good to see you at the Purdue University Fort Wayne basketball casino night. Your shoes were quite a hit. Tell us a little bit about the shoes.
Thank you. I am not one who grew up in shoe culture, and so this was my first foray into Jordans, and specifically low Jordans, AJ1s. Mostly I liked the color scheme because they were black and gold and white.
Yep.
And with respect to athletics, I grew up a New Orleans Saints fan. My wife went to Purdue University,
all right.
So the Boilermakers. And now that we are Purdue Fort Wayne and have the same color scheme, there's multiple applications for these shoes. Casino night was the first time I had a chance to wear them.
All right. Well, great. Did you win a lot of fake money at casino night?
We enjoy that experience for the auction.
Yeah.
The casino tables themselves get so busy so fast that we don't typically play the casino games too much. But we have patterned a number of family vacations based on experiences at that event.
Awesome.
And so we're there to find out what is our year going to entail.
All right. Did you take anything home from the auction this year?
Got a really cool T-shirt. And then the big win was a fly fishing experience.
Oh, wow.
At a date yet to be determined.
Okay. Well, that's great.
But for those kind of fun experiences, there can be a ton of value built in.
Yeah.
In years past, we had the opportunity to tour the U.S. Open tennis in Queens, New York.
Yeah.
I had never been to the Arthur Ashe Stadium, and this experience gave us a chance to go actually in the bowels underneath the court and actually be in the little cutouts so you could see the players shuffling back and forth. And in a really cool happenstance opportunity, we got a chance to meet Chris Evert and Patrick McEnroe because they were calling a game.
Oh, that's great.
But we got that experience through casino night.
Yeah.
It was a highlight.
All right. Well, it sounds like you did pretty well and you didn't lose any real money, so that's great. All right. Well, thanks again for being with us. As you know, on this podcast, we talk about career path, talk about the organization that you work for and some of the things you're working on. And there's an especially intriguing angle to your work that I think we'll focus on, and that is NIL, name, image, and likeness in college sports. But we'll start at the beginning, whatever that is for you. Before we hit record, you were telling me you grew up in Louisiana. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up, and when you decided that the world of the law was for you, and how you ended up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, of all places.
So it's interesting, personal history-wise. I actually went to my undergrad institution. So I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana originally, born and raised, spent the first 18 years of life there. When it came time to choose a path for undergraduate school, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Emory University in Atlanta had about 100% medical school placement for undergrad. And I liked those odds.
Yeah.
So I was accepted to Emory. It was a great experience. After I had taken all the prereqs and taken the MCAT, and I got an interview request to the only school I applied to.
Okay.
I made that decision with one semester left that medicine was not going to be for me.
Okay.
And that I would probably follow the path of law like the four James O'Connors before me had done. Most of my parents' friends all knew I would be a lawyer before I knew I would be a lawyer.
So you said you had just one semester left of med school?
That's right. Well, of undergrad.
Undergrad, okay.
So no true pre-law classes.
Got it.
But I had 18 years of life living with lawyers to know what that would be like.
Yeah, and it still didn't scare you away.
It was like a round peg in a round hole. Once it fit, it fit.
So tell me a little bit about law school and where you go from there.
So with law school really just being, and it's hard for me to fully appreciate the dynamic now because ultimately the age of the internet dovetails beautifully with what NIL opportunities are around. But as I remind my 17-year-old, I grew up in an era before there was the internet.
Yes, as did I, and I'm thankful for that just about every day.
It has given an interesting world perspective.
Yeah.
But then the path was you go to a good undergraduate school, you go to a good professional school, and then you establish a career wherever you're going to have life.
Yeah.
The internet has opened so many doors and so many different avenues that now there's almost unlimited choices. Notwithstanding that, to start the career, hey, where did you want to live? And you almost backfilled a career based on setting up a life.
Sure.
my wife and I chose to start our life in Fort Wayne because she was from Fort Wayne, and we wanted grandparents to be an influence on children. We didn't know yet. So that was the plan, and now that's been 20 years. Along the way, oh, by the way, there's been this information revolution and this incredible connective device known as the internet. And so that's been an interesting twist. But taking my law degree and applying it in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I had no family, had some connections. Litigation specifically for me was a very good way to get to know the people of Fort Wayne, people of Allen County, people of Northeast Indiana. Eventually, litigation turned into a focus on employment law. Employment law involves a ton of counseling with people. You're not so much in the courtroom solving problems. You might be consulting on the front end, sort of the ounce of prevention being worth the pound of cure. But in the employment law arena, there's lots of different ways to connect. I have an interest in sports, and as my wife is a tenured professor now at PFW. We saw young people who were coming into the world of professional sports. I was able to take my education background and training as an employment lawyer and counsel them through some of the adult decisions they previously would never know about. And so that was a fun experience and exposure for me. But then as the NIL opportunities came along, what I have come to learn is this really is an opportunity for young people to start businesses early. And so the interest is there, the ability is there for them to have side hustles in their college careers. And but just because you have a want to doesn't mean you have the know-how to. And being an employment lawyer, having some experience with small business ownership, you can educate young people and just help bring them along because they may not have had the benefit of experience or family members who have done businesses before.
Well, and you and I have been involved, you more intimately in the athletic side at Purdue University Fort Wayne, helping athletes understand how to prepare themselves for success in the future. And it's kind of nice to remember that we know some stuff, and there's things we didn't know when we were 20. There was a moment when I was working on a presentation for the basketball team, and I said, this seems kind of obvious. And then I said, well, it's obvious to me at 52. I don't know how obvious it is to someone at 20. And that perspective, I think, is very helpful, even if someone is on the right path, just to validate that they're making good decisions.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit. You do this work for Barrett and McNagny, and we've had Molly Rommel on the podcast previously. But tell us your perspective on Barrett, and then we'll get deep into the NIL weeds. But tell us a little bit about Barrett. What's the firm like, and what's been your experience there? What do you think they do especially well?
So my perspective is a little different than most of the attorneys who have practiced there, only because I come from New Orleans and from a family of lawyers. So many of our young lawyers who may not have lawyers in the family come in and they think, hey, it's a cool building. These are nice lawyers to learn from. But for me, there's a competitive advantage in the practice of law when you can be affiliated with an institution as old as Barrett McNagny. When you have a law firm that has been handing out good, high-quality legal service and advice to a number of businesses, not just based in Fort Wayne, not just in Northeast Indiana, but the state and sometimes the nation. There's an instant credibility that for a young lawyer from New Orleans who didn't have these connections, to be able to say, I'm an associate at Barrett McNagny, gave me credibility in the community that I wouldn't have otherwise earned. All right. 20 years later, I'd like to think I've put myself in a position to be a value add to the current makeup of attorneys, to be able to say, yep, James has been with us for 20 years, and this is the kind of output you can expect from a Barrett lawyer. Well,
ultimately, you're in a relationship business. It's a business where reputation is everything. And if you can get a little bit of that tailwind coming in the door at the start of your career, that's an advantage, especially. I mean, you and I have in common the fact that when we moved here, we knew almost no one and have built a career from the ground up. And that's, in your line of work, you need the credibility, even to a greater extent than I do in my line of work. But it really comes down to making the most of that association with the firm and then hopefully passing on to the next generation an even better reputation.
It was an important component of having the door opened, having the opportunity to present. Then once you have the opportunity, you have to deliver a high-quality product to the client so that they can have faith and confidence that, okay, you're capable of giving us the work. We're glad we trusted the organization initially. Now we have a better understanding of the face with this name and the kind of advice we can expect.
Yeah. So do you do most of your work in Northeast Indiana, or is it further afield than that?
So for the first part of my career, it was almost exclusively in Northeast Indiana. I can't think of a courthouse in Northeast Indiana that I haven't been in.
Okay.
And I've been in a healthy number of them, even to the west of the state, north of Indy. So to get to know the people, get to know the geography was important for that part. Now, given the nature of my work, it has become a little larger in scope. I do a lot of drafting for executive contracts, and the companies could be located literally anywhere. So we just finished up a very large project where a client was acquiring an entity in California, and California has some very strict rules about what constitutes the practice of law there.
Sure.
So being able to engage with local counsel to work collaboratively on a project, make sure we dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and do it in a compliant way. Yes, that's the name of the game, but the world is opening.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so tell me how you get from labor and employment law to NIL. Build a bridge, and maybe let's start with, for those who aren't aware of NIL, what is it? Why does it matter? How is it affecting student athletes today?
So I mentioned briefly before the connection to Purdue Fort Wayne athletes as they were taking the step from college sports into professional sports. With my employment law background and experience, being able to educate young professionals who happen to work in a sports environment, some of the underpinnings, the infrastructure of a work environment don't change just because it happens to be a really cool place to work.
Yep.
So educating them on what they could reasonably expect and the kinds of roles people would be playing in their world, agents, for example, being able to educate them on, okay, you've been presented with an agent contract. If you're going to be an international player, you need to know what international employment rules are going to apply to that instance. And is the contract drafted according to best practices or standards within the industry? Well, that meant I had to know what those were to be able to identify the issues. So as the young people had a need and I had an interest, I acquired the skill set to be able to counsel them accordingly.
Okay.
Jumping forward then to NIL, the same principles of young people who have quasi-employment related issues, i.e. earning compensation. It just happens to be in connection with name, image, and likeness as opposed to wages, a separate component of employment compensation. There's an important distinction between those two concepts. And that's not something that even a lot of undergraduate professors can educate them about. So if I'm in a position where I have a skill set and an ability to educate and consult, and it's fun for me to watch these young people grow. I'm actually developing a client base with this person, and this person, while they're earning NIL compensation in college, eventually may move into their own business. They may move into management at a local business. The point is, I'm building a relationship with the individual, and with wherever that individual's career goes, they may need legal services. And so there's a comebacker.
And they also are probably at some point in their career, even if they don't need legal services, they will know someone who will.
That's right.
So NIL, just to lay the groundwork, is name, image, and likeness. It's the opportunity for student athletes to be compensated for really promoting products and services.
That's right.
Is that correct? And this was, as we talked about earlier, this was a 180 where it was forbidden, you couldn't do it. And there's, a lot of people who are speculating, well, it was happening anyway, so this just makes it, reputable. There are some people who say, best thing ever, athletes should be compensated, it's the free market at work. There's other people saying, this is going to be a disaster, it's the worst thing ever. Help us sort that out. And obviously some of it is opinion, but what's the reality of it? What do you think the lay of the land is, based on what we know today? And there's obviously a lot we still have to learn.
So we're only about 4 months deep into the rights of student athletes to capitalize. Even before the rights existed, the conventional wisdom suggested that, like, just because an athlete had the opportunity to capitalize or might be in a position one day doesn't mean that a consuming public is going to put their buying or purchase power into what the athlete is promoting.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that a business is going to invest its marketing budget into an athlete with an unproven ROI return.
Sure.
So, now to your point about before July 1 of 2021, the NCAA's prohibition on permitting athletes to receive this level of compensation, as it happens, there's a fair amount of litigation involving the NCAA on a variety of factors, one of which includes, are athletes employees? Was it wrong for them to squelch the opportunity for NIL compensation? And some of that is active and ongoing as we speak. The NCAA was put in a spot where, in my opinion, the state of Florida had taken a hard plant-the-flag stance and said, as of July 1, 2021, we will permit our student-athletes to receive this compensation. In other words, they passed a statute that said no association, read NCAA, could deem ineligible an athlete who received NIL dollars.
Okay.
All right. Well, not wanting to be left behind, states like Nebraska, Colorado, California, forget where New Jersey fell into that. They may have come along a little bit later, but there were about 6 states that jumped in hard and agreed. And so July 1, 2021 became a pretty important date where the NCAA, who really only exists by virtue of an agreement amongst universities to have them regulate their industry, would then be in a spot to say, look, we're not a lawmaking body. We're not Congress. We're not a state legislature. We can't override what the state of Florida has done, so we better embrace it. And so just on the eve before, they came out with a new position statement and said, effective June 30, 2021, we are rescinding our prior prohibition against the ability for student athletes to receive this kind, subject to, and then they put together 3 or 4 bullet points that largely summarized or were bullet points that you saw in various states' legislation. So they picked sort of the best practices of what was starting to come in from the various states and said, as long as the school is compliant with these general principles, then it's going to be okay.
Okay.
Well, the challenge with that is you wind up with a wild, wild west where it's undefined and what can you do or what can't you do. There is currently 7 pieces of proposed federal legislation that would basically preempt and overwrite all of the individual states.
Okay.
The nice thing from the employment lawyer in me is when you have one uniform baseline standard of a law, then it doesn't matter, and it comes from the feds, it doesn't matter what the states are doing. Federal law, through a concept called preemption, trumps state law. That actually creates the most level playing field for all the states, all the schools within those states, so that student athletes have a little bit of certainty.
Sure. And, well, one of the things that's at play here for sure is the possibilities for a starting quarterback at LSU are very different than, someone who might be playing tennis at a less well-known Division I school. So how are you counseling? How are you working with student athletes now? What are you telling them? What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the pitfalls? And what advice are you giving them?
So you bring up a good point about the relative success stories, right? This is the marketplace at work. Just because a student athlete has the opportunity to capitalize doesn't mean he or she actually will. That all depends on the willing buyer, the company offering the dollars, and the willing seller, or the name, image, and likeness recipient, right? So the success and the degree of success is going to follow some pretty traditional business philosophies, right? If you're the quarterback for LSU, you're quarterback for Alabama, the goalie for the IU women's soccer team, there are going to be certain positions where people have just more eyes on you.
Absolutely.
The more eyes you have on you, the more followers you have in today's social media world, the greater value you can be to a brand. So what I'm telling young people is, you're a brand ambassador. If you want to be getting NIL dollars, you're recognizing that you're a salesperson, you're a brand ambassador. You have to conduct yourself like a professional so that a business has its faith and confidence to be affiliated with you.
Yep. And hopefully they're already doing that by virtue of being part of a team. I know that, when I was working with Coach Kaufman, one of the things that he made very clear, and I was glad he did, was that, what we're asking or recommending students do or advising them to do here in some cases is no different than what we advise them to do as representatives of the university. And I think that's a good entry point. It's kind of like, you are now about something bigger than yourself. You need to remember that at every touch point.
NIL presents a really interesting continuation of the purpose for the undergraduate institution and college sports within that institution. If the core mission is to educate young people just from an academic standpoint, fine. If then you're training job skills to help ensure that the young person has the ability to earn a higher income later, great. College sports teaches all the other great life lessons, perseverance, skills, working as a team, things like that. Well, so now you're marrying these concepts with NIL to say, you're getting these core competencies in marketing, in business management, job skills. You have a unique opportunity, a platform, if you will, for fans of the sport to watch how you do it. And now you're getting early exposure to capitalizing on the business skills that the school should be teaching you. So I have heard that some coaches are hesitant to embrace NIL, and this is across many, many schools, just because they don't understand it. Right. Well, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not going to ultimately benefit your student athletes. And isn't it part of then your mission in raising young people to be good stewards of the community, to be ambassadors for your university, to do the best job they can, not only selling themselves, but then perhaps marketing with people and developing business skill set?
Yeah. Well, and the way that I've seen Coach Kaufman leverage it, and I applaud this, I think this is great, is to say, think long term. Think about how NIL can benefit you. And one of the things he said, and I want to get your take on this too, is that while, certainly Purdue University Fort Wayne doesn't have the fan base of an LSU or an Alabama, it's a unique opportunity because of the size market that it is there's plenty of opportunity. I know one of the things that I've enjoyed most about building a career here is the opportunity to connect with people because there's 2 degrees of separation. Everybody knows someone who you want to meet, and very easy to make build those relationships. Also, from a Division I athletics standpoint, it's the only game in town, and you have an athlete base that while we do, we're fortunate to have other pro sports teams, many pro sports teams, a lot of those athletes come and go year to year. So it's a unique opportunity here. What's your take on that and how students might leverage what's unique about Fort Wayne?
So for as much, we were talking about earlier, I have 3 daughters. We don't skew towards athletics as much as we skew towards show choir. So, and that's great. Show choir is fantastic, ton of entertainment. But I see friends of ours who have invested big time, effort, energy, resources in developing hockey skills, travel soccer skills, football skills, basketball skills. Well, PFW winds up bringing in athletes from all over the nation to come play in Purdue Fort Wayne. To your point about Fort Wayne being 2 degrees of separation, these young people who are in some cases getting exposed to Fort Wayne for the very first time are seeing what a neat community it is. And just like businesses embrace the culture of Fort Wayne, these athletes are then saying, you know what, I could see a life in Fort Wayne.
Yeah, for sure.
For the cost of living, for the quality of the employment, et cetera, et cetera. So pitching the notion of, as a student athlete at Purdue Fort Wayne, or because the NIL rules will apply all the way down to NAIA level, being exposed to and embracing relationships with employers is a really good way to ensure that the talent at the college level now stays and supplements the workforce we need in Fort Wayne anyway.
Yeah, and there's that that high potential for a symbiotic relationship where the city needs institutions like Purdue University Fort Wayne to build its workforce. The colleges need the student recruitment, the ability to recruit students from, in a time of a population cliff coming. They need to be able to recruit students from all over the country and around the world. And the student is looking for an opportunity. And I think we're fortunate here in Northeast Indiana to have multiple colleges that can be feeders for the future workforce. NIL is just a small part of that, but it might be the draw, the opportunity might be the draw that keeps a student here in the long run.
Let's take, for example, there's an insurance program at St. Francis. There are a number of insurance companies based in Fort Wayne. If you had the right student athlete who was involved in an NIL opportunity at St. Francis getting exposure to a Fort Wayne-based insurance company, boy, isn't it nice to be able to say, oh, I would like to apply for the internship at the company who has already paid me to rep their brand.
Yeah, for sure. So, students have a short-term opportunity in that they can partner with a company. A lot of it might be on the retail side, where they partner and they act as a spokesperson for that company, gets that company in front of an audience that maybe they can't get in front of on their own, a younger audience or an audience of fans of that sport. There's also the long-term opportunity to use NIL to build a brand, build relationships, and think about long-term career. Can student athletes have it both ways, or do they need to pick either path?
Well, because there are short-term goals and long-term goals, you really can have both. And if you only have so many years of eligibility to play a sport, it's almost like internships. The more NIL opportunities you have and exposure to other companies who might want to sponsor you, doesn't mean you have to be pigeonholed into one particular company. In other words, if you have a degree in electrical engineering, but you wind up getting an NIL sponsorship deal in a retail sector, a student athlete might say, you know what, but for my NIL opportunity, I would never have known that I enjoy this facet of business.
Sure.
So there can be a short-term goal of exposure to all different kinds of industries to confirm a career path.
Yeah.
And then the more certain a young person is about the path they're on, well, that in theory should suggest long-term success or comfort with the chosen path.
Yeah. So for the audience that hopefully is listening, I hope some of you are out there listening to this podcast who are largely marketers, what's the opportunity for them? Might sound like an obvious question, but what's the opportunity for companies that are looking to tell their story, to reach an audience, and how can they leverage NIL in that way?
There's, to me, two immediate ways jump to mind. The first is, as you indicated, exposure to a different demographic group. One that, so if depending on what your product or service is, this athlete is going to have different eyes on him or her that may not have existed traditionally before.
Yeah.
All right. So ultimately, demographic focus, that's one thing. Some small businesses might just be real fans. If they're alumni of their particular university and they just want to support the cause. Now, there's a delicate balance in all of the NIL legislation about pay for play and pay to play. Those are two serious no-nos, and the NCAA will come down hard on anything that they deem to be not fair market value based. Right?
Sure.
So we can't allow NIL to be just a cloak for illegal recruiting.
Yeah. So to use an example, it's plausible that a school could say, hey, I know you're looking at multiple schools, but if you come here, we'll guarantee $1 million contract with retailer down the road, and the boosters will help pay for that because they really want you to come here. That's not really above board right now.
That's still a prohibitive. That would, in that fact pattern, a pretty clear violation of a recruiting pay for play or pay to play scenario. That is not okay. Now, because we're still 4 months into an otherwise undefined patchwork of states-based structure, there's going to be a lot of feeling out. What tests the bounds and what doesn't. And if you have a legal concept as generic as fair market value, and if fair market value is defined as what is a willing seller going to give a willing buyer, all right, well, there's a ton of leeway in there. A number of federal laws, a number of consortiums and think tanks who have been working in the NIL space have advocated for sort of a collective database to help establish, and with actual research and transaction-oriented data, be able to say, look, we can define what fair market value is based on industry standards. So that if you have $1 million going to the fifth best golfer on an already low-level low mid-tier program, okay, maybe that's going to raise some flags. Now, on the flip side, if you have every SEC starting quarterback with a car deal and a shoe deal and a housing deal, that could be what the industry says is fair market value. And I'm sure that one of the entities asking questions are the students themselves, saying, what is my NIL worth? I have X number of followers on social media. My team, is in this conference.
What does that mean? What should I be asking for?
There are a number of software-based platforms that are already working as a clearinghouse, and in some cases, the student-athlete need only apply to be a subscriber or a member to that platform, and that software that company will act as the clearinghouse or intermediary to connect the athlete with potential NIL opportunities. When you have the same thoroughfare, same conduit, same entity, to the extent they are promoting themselves as ensuring compliance, that's where you're going to have some value add in the service they provide, because they're going to be able to say, based on our data, we know you can reasonably expect. Now, for the most part, at very early stages, these deals are very low level. I mean, I'm seeing things like between $25 and $75 for a 24-hour post on social media. It might be an in-kind donation. That's going to be a very popular way for business owners to do something, just because business owners, if they're really looking at it from an ROI standpoint, they're looking to stretch out marketing dollars.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in addition to playing by the rules, what else do marketers need to know in order to decide if an opportunity is right for them?
So it depends on how far the reach of this particular podcast goes, but because every state is going to treat things a little differently in the absence of federal legislation. Indiana, for example, has no NIL law, which means it resorts back to school policy. For marketers who are interested in discussing NIL opportunities, you're going to need to know whether the university will permit their use of intellectual property. Here at Purdue Fort Wayne, for example, we've been talking about them a bit. If you want the Mastodon to be in the picture with your chosen athlete, that's going to require a level of clearance that the athlete may not be able to provide. And it doesn't mean the school won't provide it. It just may mean that there's a licensing fee associated with it, or an extra set of eyes that have to document the proper use of that.
Sure. And in some states, it's as simple, if my understanding is correct, in some states, it's as simple as you can't wear any team gear if you're, taking advantage of an NIL opportunity. Whereas here, school by school, my understanding is Purdue University Fort Wayne says as long as you have approval, you can be in your team gear when you're representing a business.
What you've touched on in a roundabout sort of way is what I call the conflicts and disclosure component to NIL. And I've actually put together a program. It reads like a pamphlet, but it's called the ABCs of NIL. And it specifically identifies for any consumer, whether you're in administration, whether you're the parent of a student with an NIL opportunity, whether you're the athlete or the coaches who need to know about it. It educates the reader on A stands for attorneys and agents. What role do they play? B stands for banned industries. What can't the athlete do? C and D, conflicts and disclosures. And so what you've touched on is the school may have an official apparel partner. And if you're an Under Armour school and you know that for all official team activities, the expectation is they're wearing UA gear, and Nike, Adidas, or Puma, or Reebok want to come in and say, okay, athlete, we want you to wear our merch, then the athlete has to know to identify the issue, bring it to the forefront of the school administrator and say, I've been asked to rep this merch in unofficial contexts. When can I wear this so that I can engage in the NIL deal?
So this is pretty complicated. There's a lot of layers. Well, and NIL could take up all your time, but I'm assuming it doesn't. What other things, switching gears for just a second, what are some of the other things that you're working on? And obviously, being an attorney, you can't share all the details, but what are some of the other things that occupy your time, that are on your plate, that are exciting to you, or keeping you up at night, or maybe all those things?
Because my career started heavy litigation, I still have my hand in a number of litigation-based things. That means jury trials, that means depositions, and mediations. So I've got a couple of trials slated in the next couple of months. There's a ton of effort and energy that goes into those. You talk about marketing and sales. There's a big component of salesmanship in jury trials. Depositions, mediations are other components and steps along the way. All of that requires preparation and execution. Contract drafting doesn't require as much talking. It's a little more computer-based, but sometimes it's a nice pivot and a way to think differently.
Sure, and everything that's going on with OSHA and the federal government right now, I won't go down that road too far because we will get hate mail regardless of what I say. But that, I'm sure, is keeping you very busy and keeping employers up at night right now.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head. When the rules of the game change in an employment context, the people who are running those teams, running running those businesses want to make sure they're doing it right.
Yeah.
The tie-in between employment law and compliance and regulation, then for me, is a natural feed into NIL because it's a brand new thing.
Yep.
And the more you can shed light on issues that people have an interest in, that's the fun part.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the fun part.
For sure. Okay, well, we're going to switch now to the speed round of the show where we sort of sum up with 3 questions that sound a little bit like some of the things we've talked about, but that are more concise. At least I ask the guest to make it more concise. My questions aren't often concise, but I'll try. So first question has to do with career path. You've built a successful career as an attorney. You've worked for the same place for a number of years, but you've done different things in that role. What's your best advice in terms of building a successful career? If you were talking to your 17-and-a-half-year-old daughter or one of your other daughters or someone, one of the athletes maybe who you're working with, and they said, what does it take to build a successful career? What would you tell them?
Make sure you're good at what you do, your core competencies, and then allow yourself the freedom to evolve. For me, I know myself well enough that doing the same thing on a rote basis all day, every day would be so monotonous that I would burn out fast.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I haven't enjoyed 17 plus years of litigation specifically.
Sure.
That develops a skill set that has other applications.
Sure.
That application could be used teaching college administrators about NIL. So allowing myself the freedom to change the interest, but still being able to put food on the table and provide for the people who are depending on me is a nice permission to have granted my 17-year-old self to say, yes, get started, get a little messy, get some experience, get roughed up, learn how to do what you're doing very well, and then be ready to take that skill set and pivot as necessary. Because if you're evolving and you have different ways to apply yourself, frankly, there's some job security with that.
Yeah, for sure. As long as you can solve a problem and be useful, you will have a career, but you're probably not going to be doing the same thing 10 years from now that you're doing today.
The concept of value add has lots of applications.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, second question. And this is one where I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. You are from 4 generations of attorneys, a family with 4 generations
Correct.
of attorneys. What do you think is the biggest misconception about attorneys? Here's your chance to clear it up. What is the reality based on? And maybe all the misconceptions are actually accurate.
So I'll shade the answer this way. The stereotypes, the reason the jokes and the stereotypical punchlines for jokes about lawyers are funny is because there's a kernel of truth in a lot of them, right? And so having some degree of self-awareness to be able to understand what the joke is and how it's predicated, that's okay. It is kind of funny that particularly in litigation, the people who are literally paid to orate and stand and make statements, some are bold and some are not so bold. In some cases, whether it's ego, whether it's sensitive, they can be very sensitive people. Mm-hmm. And so it is funny to see how a well-timed jab can really cut like a lance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was just recently, Love Your Lawyer Day was celebrated, and a friend of mine who's an attorney, we had a lot of fun with that one. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of love being shown to him on that day or any day, but it's something you probably know coming into the profession.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, last question. We've been through a lot in the last couple of years, and I think everyone has experienced changes of one sort or another, some more profound than others. But what have you learned over the past couple of years, something you didn't know before the pandemic that has changed your perception in a way that you think will stick with you? What's something that sort of disrupted your work life that has changed things forever, maybe in a good way, maybe in a not so good way, but you think is here to stay?
Yeah, going back to the use of the internet as an important tool for productivity.
Yeah.
The idea that, and at some point sooner than later, the American Bar Association will have to update some of their rules and regulations for how attorneys provide legal services. Specifically, anything that limits the attorney to a geography.
Yeah.
Just because I hold an Indiana license, if I want to be in New Orleans visiting my mom,
sure,
I should be able to provide legal services consistent with the best practices and my license in Indiana.
Yeah.
Some of the rules schools have already adopted that way.
Sure.
But I think you'll see things like video conferencing. Lawyers would much prefer to do a deposition live. In some cases, that's not as possible.
Sure.
So utilization of video conferencing technology, that's here to stay.
Yeah, for sure.
Mediation, that kind of participation. I still believe that jury trials will require a component part of an in-person attendance just because of the experience and using exhibits. There's always going to be a need for that. But even in an industry that can be as stodgy as the practice of law, we really can incorporate technology to be efficient.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's something that, demand is going to drive that. Kind of in an interesting way, kind of like what happened with NIL. This reality got ahead of the rules, and the rules had to catch up, and maybe that'll happen with the practice of law as well.
One can hope.
Yeah. Well, James, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Really appreciate learning more about your work and the work you're doing with the students over at Purdue University, Fort Wayne.
This is a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the ASHA Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.